Okay, this is, we're still going through Mark's Gospel, and we're in chapter 10 of Mark's Gospel. I'm going to say a couple of things that we already covered before. The Gospel of Mark is the oldest of the four Gospels, and Mark was traveling with Apostle Peter. He went to Alexandria with him when he was there, and he's really the patron of the Coptic Orthodox Church. They use the liturgy of St. Mark and have quite a tradition of Mark's presence and teaching in Alexandria in Egypt. But Mark apparently also went to Rome with Peter and then came back to Alexandria. And he wrote the Gospel based largely on the stories that Apostle Peter told him. So in a way, Mark's Gospel is the story, is the remembrances of Apostle Peter. And Mark was his scribe. Just like Apostle Paul, he had a scribe who wrote many of his things. Paul, I think, only wrote one or two of the epistles himself with his own hand. And in one place he says, this epistle I've written to you in my own hand, because Luke was his scribe for many of them, and perhaps Timothy or someone else. Paul's Greek was a little bit clumsy. But some of the epistles have a very beautiful Greek style, and that would have been what he dictated to Luke, and Luke wrote it, because Luke was a medical doctor, very highly educated, and he was Greek. So when he wrote for Paul, it would be very, very smooth and very nice. One of the mistakes people make when they try to do a critical analysis of the writings in the Bible, they'll say, well, they couldn't all be by Paul because the style doesn't match. Well, we know the style doesn't match because Paul didn't write them all with his own hand, he dictated. The epistle to the Romans, at the end of it, it says, I, Tertius, who wrote this epistle. In other words, Paul was dictating to Tertius, and Tertius wrote it down. Now, if his Greek was better, he would polish it up a bit. Even Jeremiah, you remember, didn't write anything himself. He had a scribe named Baruch, and Baruch wrote what he dictated for him. So sometimes we see a difference in style because the author was actually dictating it, and the person would kind of like a proofreader, kind of like Father Moses does with things I write. He goes through and corrects the punctuation and the grammar and some of the spelling. But then Father Moses had his degree in university was in English, and so he's a very good proofreader. Actually, he was proofreader for the Los Angeles Times for years. So he goes over my stuff with a red pen and proofs it too. And that's what happened with some of the things that the apostles wrote, is that whoever they were dictating to would clean it up, make it a little nicer. So that's why the different styles. There's no reason at all to think that Mark did not write the epistle. Some people ask, did Mark actually write it? But we have no reason to think otherwise, that he did. The Papias was a bishop in the 2nd century, that is in the 100s already. And he mentions Mark writing the epistle. So we were quite certain that Mark actually wrote it, but that it's really the remembrances of Apostle Peter. And we said before that Mark was not as interested in the proper chronology as he was in putting stories together to create a picture. When we started with this gospel, we looked at what was it that John the Baptist needed to prepare the way for Jesus Christ. Part of it was to try to get it out of people's mind that he was going to be a great military dictator, and that he was going to come and slaughter a bunch of Romans and other people and make a Jewish empire. That was kind of the idea that people had. But John came to prepare the way for Christ, announcing, look, this is a spiritual matter. The Messiah is a spiritual Messiah. And the real enemy is not Rome, the real enemy is the devil. So if Christ came to destroy the power of Satan, not to worry about the Roman Empire, and not to build a Jewish empire where if you had an empire, you'd be just as bad as the Romans. So what benefit would it be morally or spiritually for you to have an empire? but people expected something like that. And that brings me to the 10th chapter of the Gospel of Mark, because in this place, Jesus had just finished telling about that he would be arrested and betrayed, and that they would kill him, and that he'd rise again on the third day. And so James and John are thinking, oh, well, then he's going to build this empire. So the two sons of Zebedee, the sons of thunder, as he called them, James and John, they came to him and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask you." And he said to them, "What is it you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit one on your right hand and the other on your left in your glory." But Jesus said, "You don't know what you're asking for." There are differences in ambition. Aspirations are higher than ambition. Sometimes ambition is the death of aspirations. We lose our aspirations and we lose our idealism in the face of ambitions. And when we talk about the danger of ambition, we realize that people will often misunderstand, because we want our children to have some ambition. We want them to be ambitious to finish school, to have a good marriage, to have a decent job. All these things that we liken to ambition. But there's another kind of ambition. And Shakespeare has Mark Antony saying in his funeral oration for Caesar, if he was ambitious, it was a grievous fault, and most grievously hath he answered it. Because the ambition for power, to lord it over other people, to have power over other people, this is a kind of ambition that comes from Satan. And just ordinary ambition to get ahead in life and that sort of thing. Nobody's speaking about that, but we do have to stop and think about the kinds of ambition that are very destructive. Actually, we'd like for our children to have aspirations, to aspire to something better, to something higher. And even to get a good education. There's a difference between getting an education as a virtue and getting an education just for business. And in the 1960s, the end of the 50s and 60s, we had something, basically we called it the Berkeley movement, because suddenly realized that in the university we weren't really being educated, we were being programmed. Of course we have a little of that now. We're being programmed for industry, and we're being programmed just for job seeking, but to be taught a broader education so that we become more civilized. And so when we have an aspiration for education, we genuinely want knowledge, we want to become more civilized, we want to become more human, and we want to have greater understanding of the rest of the people in the world. But when we're educated for ambition, it's just so we can get ahead and get a good job and make a lot of money. That's one of the differences between really aspirations and ambition. But politicians generally are ambitious, and we can always find flaws and faults in our politicians. And part of that is some people go into Parliament or something because they have aspirations. They really think they're going to do something better for the country and the people. But if they get at the highest levels, ambition begins to take over. And that's one of the difficulties of the faults. So here you have two apostles who have heard all of Christ's teachings about meekness and humility and the meek inheriting the earth and blessed are the poor in spirit and all this. And suddenly Christ says, "Oh, I'm going to be crucified and I'll rise again." And instead of being horrified at these words of Christ, right away they think, oh, then he's going to form his kingdom. And we want to be on the right and the left hand of the kingdom. We want to be right up there at the top. So they kind of lose the whole concept for a few minutes. And don't we see that in religion too? Because I know the late, great Patriarch Alexis is one of my heroes, Patriarch Alexei. He was warning about clergy who were careerists. And clergy would become priests and stay unmarried because they wanted to be bishops. And they wanted to be bishops so they would have power and authority and really live well. They weren't there for the right reasons. And this is something what happens. They say, well, I'm a follower of Christ, I'm a Christian, but I can get power and wealth through the church. That's why we often say that a person like Stalin, if the church was the path to political power, he would have been in church every Sunday because he wanted power. That was everything to him. And he would have used and manipulated even the church for it. Well, here, is it surprising when you have two of the closest apostles and even the beloved disciple, John, who think, oh, he's going to rise again. This is when we're going to have the kingdom, and we want to be right there on the top. We want a crown on the throne. And they miss the whole point. And Christ says, you don't know what you're asking for, because the crown is going to be a crown of thorns, and the throne is going to be the cross. And people who won't be worshiping, they'll be mocking. And he said, the cup that I drink, can you drink it? The baptism that I have to go through, can you be baptized that way? And they replied, yes, we're able. And Jesus said to him, well, you'll get that cup, and you'll get that baptism. But I can't give you to sit on my right and my left hand, because that's already predetermined by the Father. And of course, that's the Theotokos of the Baptist, but he doesn't say that. And the 10 other disciples, apostles, heard what James and John had asked for, and they became angry. So now you see, because of this little bit of ambition, you have a division, even in the closest followers of Christ, because ambition has come in. And it's kind of splits and divides even the closest followers of Christ. But this happens so often in, we think of these things sometimes as something remote and something that happened in ancient times. And we don't realize how often this whole thing is replayed in our own lives. You see it in a parish where you have a parish council, and the parish council wants power. Somebody wants to be president of the parish so he can have power of some kind. And I know when I was serving in a Serbian parish, we had people who were atheists who were on the parish council because they hadn't learned to speak English very well, and the only place they could get any kind of feeling of political power was in the parish, because they spoke the language. So they would get into the parish council, they didn't care anything about the church at all, but they wanted that role and that position and that title. And this is something that's very destructive in practically every field where human beings are involved. Sometimes even in families, even among brothers and sisters, you have this kind of struggle. Who's going to be top dog? And it happens in industry and business. Even in some businesses, especially really big industry where you have a lot of executives, if there's a possibility of a promotion coming up, people will start slandering each other and start trying to create problems for the competition, to get the competition out of the way, because they want that power. And they don't want that position for any kind of positive reason. They want it for the power and the extra money, mostly for the power. And sometimes people amass a great deal of wealth, not because they're addicted to money, but because money buys power. So it's about power that they're after. I've run into several cases over the years where a man who was in a junior executive position, suddenly there would start being whispers to his wife that he was having an affair, that he was messing around. When he traveled on business, he was actually had girlfriends and things. And it completely wasn't true, but why the wife of one man was kind of whispering these things to her? Because he was also up for this promotion. Now, if you can cause domestic problems, it's going to throw the opposition off, the other person off balance. And they're going to have domestic problems, they're not going to perform as well, so there won't be as much competition for the promotion. They're very devious, these things that go on. And of course you always start with something sexual if you want to slander somebody or get rid of them. And this happened to the point where I'm sure some divorces were caused by it, but the person who started the rumors was competition for the promotion. And this is what you can do for power. And that's why I often say that lawful authority can come from God, but power comes from Satan, the desire for power. So this is what the apostles themselves fell into, this temptation. And we need to note that and see how easy it is if even those who are walking with Christ and hearing his words every day can fall into something like that. Then how much easier can we fall into it? And now there's this division among people. And Christ responds to them, you know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it cannot be so among you. But whosoever wishes to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be the slave of all. For the Son of Man himself came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. And if you stop and think how the King of Glory, the one who had all power over heaven and earth, came with this great meekness, with great humility and unselfishness. And everything that Christ does is completely unselfish. There's nothing to himself, nothing for himself in it. And in one point, as he says, the Son of Man doesn't even have a place to lay his head. Not a fixed address, nothing. And in fact, in the end, he's going to suffer and die. Really, the only way to restore paradise, because the fall of mankind, the story of the fall of Adam and Eve, is a story of falling from an atmosphere of unselfish love into you see the birth of ego. You can be like God if you disobey him. You can be like God. So this is ego. And then we have self-centeredness, self-love. And Christ comes, and he's absolutely the opposite. We don't see an overweening ego. He's not a dictator, not exercising power. He heals people, but then he doesn't demand that they follow him. They don't even have to be his followers afterwards. He healed them out of compassion. He didn't ask for them to worship him or be his followers. He just healed them. And sometimes he said, don't tell anybody about it. Just go and make the offering in the temple as thanksgiving to God. Not to me, but thanksgiving to God. So Christ is unselfish. He doesn't display egotism. He displays an unselfish love, a co-suffering love. And this is the truth about paradise. Paradise was a place where we weren't divided by ego or self-centeredness or self-love, but by mutual love, an unselfish love. And this is the great mystery of Christ and of our redemption. Our redemption isn't just to say, okay, I believe in Jesus. He's my personal Savior. Now I can go and do anything I want. I'll pretend I don't, but I'll do it anyway. But I'll pretend that I don't. I'll pretend that I'm hyper-moral. But this isn't what Jesus has asked of us. He's asked of us to change. And not to change in ways that, say, a Southern Baptist minister wants us to change. That is to put our change in the offering plate. But to struggle against our own ego and our own selfness, our own self-centeredness and self-focus, and really to open ourselves to a co-suffering love, to a compassionate love. And this is really the way back to paradise. My mentor, Father John Romanides, had told us that the only possible way to defeat Satan in your life is through growth in unselfish love. To defeat Satan in your home, to defeat Satan in your parish, in your community, is by the growth in unselfish love. Because it's the complete opposite, it's inimical to Satan. See, in the fall of mankind, when Satan carries out this temptation, all he's trying to do is to recreate human beings in his image and likeness, to take them away from being the image and likeness of God, and to recreate them in his image and likeness, with this kind of, malice the wrong kinds of ambition and egotism and all that. This is basically what we're seeing here played out with James and John. And Christ is calling their attention back to the fact that unselfish love means that you want to serve the others and do whatever you can for them. And that's where true greatness lies, in the kingdom of heaven. So if you want to be at the right hand and the left hand, give up your ambitions and be the servant of everyone. And then you'll be great in the heavenly kingdom. But by desiring power, prestige, position, you'll be least in the kingdom of God. So that's really the lesson for today that I wanted to bring out. And anybody have any questions before we?
Like a very good example about the ambitions, Leo Tolstoy, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's a great writer, and he was inspired, I don't know, many generations of not only Russian but all around the world. But definitely he was very ambitious, and even he was kind of like confident he can teach others because he he reached some spiritual life. But if he, I was just thinking about that, if he wouldn't ambitions, we couldn't, for example, we can lost, some very great, is it great romance like a Воскресенье or something like that.
Yeah.
What's the balance between the truly ambitions, which kind of when people feel some power to do something, or to create something? Maybe it's most related to creation, not only.
And also a little bit, it's an ambition based in aspiration. Alexei Tolstoy also wrote some very powerful things. I mean, I read Srebrenica, and it's an amazing piece of work too. But we know Tolstoy only because of his writings. We don't know him because of the green staff of Yasna Polyana, but only because of his writings. Tolstoy was the great, tak сказать, liberal, but he didn't free his serfs, did he? He was going to be the Voltaire of Russia, but he never freed his serfs. He kept that. He dressed like a peasant, but he didn't go around and eat with the peasants. So a lot of it was kind of a theater that he did.
Mm.
He tried to imitate the things that he thought were right without actually doing them. So he was actually a virtual liberal, a virtual peasant, but he wouldn't be a real one.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know whether he actually asked for a priest in the railway station when he was dying or not. Doesn't matter, they didn't bring one. But all he had to do was repent for a few things. But it's interesting the kind of spiritual delusion he went into. He was upset with the church because he said, well, you shouldn't pay so much attention to the Holy Spirit, you pay all your attention to Christ. And somehow he had missed the boat in it.
Mm-hmm.
But he left us brilliant literature. And in a way, I almost think Anna Karenina is one of the best because of the psychological study in it, the study of the kind of tragedy that comes about. Caused first of all by the social structure and the way, the pressures that run people. And also by the power of love can also be such a tragedy at times in it. He was a very powerful writer. And in that regard, his writing was probably a virtue because he was writing, because he had a drive to create. And he had these powerful insights that he wanted to put in paper. And his studies of individuals, of people in War and Peace, for example. I mean, this is a majestic novel. And one of those sort of, we use the word loosely, but immortal pieces of work. And so he had that particular power of creativity. But he also wanted something else that wasn't quite as healthy in it. And that led him into a bit of delusion. But it's true, when people want to use their talents for power, And because virtue is so misunderstood by people who use the word. Very often virtue means, let's say it means wearing a chastity belt or something, you know, it means being a hyper goody-goody. But actually, virtue means really, from the Greek, to use the skills and talents you have in the most creative way. In it. So if you see a piece of marble and you see a beautiful sculpture, if you carve this statue in order to make money, it's business, it's not virtue, and it's not art. If you carve it to create something beautiful, it's virtue, and it's art. So otherwise it's simply skill. You know, you can make money by using skills, but regardless of what it looks like, it's still not art because you created it using your skills as a part of your business. And that's perhaps the difference in it. So, anyway, I think that's enough for today. You want to? It is truly meet to call thee blessed, that failed to